Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this session today. Before Janelle George, the Deputy Director of the Office of Community Services begins, I will go over some housekeeping items for the session. The first thing is the session is being recorded, and the slides and the recording and the transcript will all be available later on our website. The presentation slides from Tuesday's session, if you attended that one, are already available, and the slides for today's session should also be available within the next day or two. The presentation recordings may take a little bit longer, but they will also be posted on our website. And second, I wanted to review just the protocols for the Q&A box and the chat box. And then also at the end, note a poll that we have for the session. So in terms of question and answer, we will be having a question and answer session after the informational portion of this presentation. So if you have questions that you would like to submit for us to read and answer, you should look at the bottom of your screen, and there should be a little icon that says Q&A, and it has two chat boxes. And then if you click there, you can enter your questions, and we will be looking at that. The chat box will be for if along the way you have comments to give on the presentation, or if you have technical issues. Due to the size of this webinar, we may not have time to address your individual technical issues, but if a lot of people are having a similar issue, it could be helpful for us to see. But if you have questions, we really encourage you to put them in the Q&A box. Another thing is during the session, we will be talking about other ways that we will be gathering feedback. And so we encourage you to also submit your questions through those other methods so that we will be able to gather them in a comprehensive way. We will do our best to address questions that will be helpful for everyone to hear, but we may not be able to get to all of your questions. And so we will be reading through all of your responses after we receive them at the end. And finally, there will be a listening session at the end of the session after the Q&A. And so we encourage you to keep that in mind, because there will be an opportunity to provide verbal comments to us at the end of the session, because we are very interested in hearing about specific concerns and questions from you. And so at the end, folks will get 3 minutes each. And so we just encourage you to keep that in mind throughout the presentation if you have comments or questions that you would like to verbalize. And finally, now I will go to the poll question. And so if you go to the bottom of your screen, this should be available if you are on the desktop app or a mobile app in Zoom. And there's a question for whether you participated in the Tuesday LIHWAP session. And for your information, if you did not attend that session, there was a general session that was made available for all grantees, state, tribal, and territorial, as well as external stakeholders, whereas this session is intended primarily for tribal grantees or for stakeholders interested in tribal related questions and comments and concerns related to this program. And so I am going to give this another minute or so, and we will look at the results, but I encourage everyone to answer so that we have a better idea of which folks attended that session versus which folks are only attending this session. Right now, it looks like 48-52%, so pretty even. These instructions will, regarding the feedback session and the Q&A and the listening session, will also be repeated at the end. And so with that, I will turn it over to Janelle George.
Thank you, Edie. Hello, everyone. My name is Janelle George, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Community Services. On behalf of Dr. LIHWAP Howard, the OCS Director, I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our second information and feedback session on the low-income Household Water Assistance Program, also known as LIHWAP. So we know that water affordability has reached a level of crisis way before the pandemic. And particularly for households and communities of colors and tribes that have been disproportionately impacted by job loss, as well as poor health and outcomes related to the coronavirus. Unaffordable water and wastewater bills mean that families are going to be forced to choose between paying for water and other necessities like housing, medicine, as well as food. And we do believe that families should really never have to choose between basic necessities or be forced to make trade-offs during a pandemic where access to clean water is something that is needed to help avoid a deadly virus. So the first thing is that, on behalf of Dr. Howard, I want to personally thank everyone that is participating in this call for all of the work you've done to just tirelessly support your tribal communities that are disproportionately affected by water debt and shutoffs. We know that your efforts to help the tribal communities and maintain access to clean water and wastewater services during this pandemic has been tremendous. And we are, quite frankly, just really excited to be able to support you in this effort. I would say that it's not often that we have the opportunity to expand the social safety net, and even if temporarily. So we have been working here at OCS very diligently to stand up this new water program as quickly as possible. We have been working with federal, state, local, and tribal partners to better understand this water landscape that's across the nation, as well as get a better understanding of some of the potential challenges to implementing a water program such as this. So I just want to reiterate that we appreciate you joining us today and to your willingness to lend your expertise and your experience, whether it is that experience rests in water and wastewater services or special services to the tribal community in terms of how to obtain those resources and support those families. Your presence and your feedback is quite appreciated. I will tell you that earlier this week, we did release the terms and conditions for LIHWAP. It is a major milestone in our timeline for releasing the LIHWAP funding because it sets the stage and the framework for how that program is to be administered. And today, over the course of probably like the next week or so, we're going to be seeking your input and your feedback on the model plan, as well as the type of guidance and TA that is needed to help ensure tribes can stand up effective and efficient LIHWAP programs in their areas. A little bit more specifically, today during this session, we're going to provide a general overview of LIHWAP and give you some updates on what we've done to stand up this new program and what's left to do. We'll also provide detailed information on some of the various ways outside of today's session that you can provide comments and feedback on the program. And this is really important because your feedback is going to help us make some final decisions on a number of key aspects, including what's included in the plan that LIHWAP grantees will have to submit to administer the program. Also know that before ending the session, we're going to identify some next steps and what information we need from grantees in order to get the funding out the door as quickly as possible. And then we're going to open up the floor for some questions and comments. So as Edie mentioned, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box. It's really important you put it in the Q&A box and not the chat box. And you can do so throughout the presentation. We know just due to the volume of participants that we will not be able to respond to all of the questions raised during the session, but we will save these questions as we receive them, and we will include them in a number of documents that we send out in terms of like LIHWAP frequently asked questions. As I indicated earlier, the purpose of this session is really to share information on what we've done so far, what's to come, and to really listen to your comments, your questions, and your concerns about administering this program. Ultimately, what we want to do is just really ensure that we have a strong situational awareness regarding the water and wastewater issues that may be critical and unique to the tribal community. And we're counting on you to help us better understand that. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce the team that has really been working diligently and tirelessly to stand up this program. And you're going to hear from each of them during today's presentation. I will start with Lauren Christopher, who is the director of OCS's Division of Energy Assistance, and that is the division which will administer LIHWAP, and they also administer the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. We have Seth Hassett, who's a senior advisor within OCS and has been leading a lot of work around LIHWAP terms and conditions. Christina Clark is a program specialist in OCS and has been taking the lead on tribal engagement and support. And last but not least, you heard from her first today, Ms. Edie Wu is a special assistant within OCS, and she's been coordinating essentially every aspect of this new program to help us get things going. We are tremendously excited about this opportunity and what it means for the communities out there that we serve. I'm incredibly proud of this team and the work that they have done thus far to help us get things moving. And I will also let you know that some of this information that you hear today was shared during our webinar on Tuesday. However, certain sections of it are tailored to address and be responsive to issues that may be unique to tribes based off of some things that we've heard to date. And so now I am going to move into the presentation portion of today's session. And I will start with speaking just a little bit about the authorizing legislation of the new water program. So first I'll say that we know the legislative direction is somewhat broad. And because of that, the Office of Community Services has worked through many aspects to stand up our new water program. What I'm going to do is, again, briefly review the authorizing legislation that's established this new emergency water program, and then I'm going to highlight some key components to help clarify our mandate. So the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 and the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 appropriated over $1.1 billion for new emergency water and wastewater assistance funding. OCS has established, as I mentioned, the Low Income Household Water Assistance Program, or LIHWAP, to implement this congressional mandate. The authorizing legislation mandates us and instructs us to assist low-income households, particularly the households with the lowest incomes that pay a high proportion of household income for drinking water and wastewater services. OCS intends to carry out this mandate by awarding these emergency funds to eligible grantees for the purposes of providing funds to owners or operators of public water systems or treatment works to reduce their arrearages of and rates charged to such households for such services. The authorizing legislation specifies that up to 3% of the amount appropriated shall be reserved for Indian tribes and tribal organizations. The legislation also specifies that the specific allocation formula that we are to employ. And this formula will be determined by the percentage of households in the state or under the jurisdiction of the Indian tribe with income equal to or less than 150% of the federal poverty line, and the percentage of such households in the state or under the jurisdiction of the Indian tribe that spend more than 30% of their monthly income on housing. And then finally, the legislation also directs us to use existing processes, procedures, policies, and any systems that we have in place to the extent practical. Our research in trying to stand up this program led OCS to conclude two sort of critical points. The first is the most closely comparable program we administer is the LIHWAP program. Therefore, we are modeling much of the rules and the procedures for this new water program around the rules in the federal LIHWAP statute, which is going to be addressed a little later in the presentation, so you can see the similarities and the differences there. We also know that we cannot apply the HHS block grant regulations that are found in 45 CFR Part 96. That cannot be applied to LIHWAP, and that's because that's a block grant regulation, which was issued for a very specific and exclusive list of programs. So we will be using the OMB Uniform Administrative Guidance, which is the default rule for HHS grants. And so for the purposes of the LIHWAP program, the regulations at 45 CFR Part 75 will apply in its entirety. Now I'd like to turn it over to Lauren Christopher, whose division, again, is going to be responsible for administering LIHWAP. Lauren will walk us through the adaptations of current processes and procedures for the purposes of implementing LIHWAP. Lauren?
Thank you, Janelle, and good morning and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for joining today's call. I can see from the poll during today's session that it's almost evenly split between how many of you were able to listen to Tuesday's session and how many of you are hearing this information for the first time. So we just want to acknowledge that today's presentation will include the information that we shared on Tuesday, but we have also added additional slides that are specific to tribal issues. So a mix of new and repeat content. As Janelle mentioned, this is an emergency program that arose out of the needs of the pandemic. More people are struggling to keep their drinking water and their wastewater services on as they face unemployment or underemployment or other pandemic-related troubles such as significant medical bills or lost time from work. So it is with that in mind that we have moved on a very accelerated path to start up this brand new program as quickly and as effectively as possible. So while this program is an emergency and temporary in nature, it's lacking a permanent authorization as of yet, we have tried to think through the critical implementation needs that will enable effective and efficient program administration at all levels. We chose to model the new program mostly off of the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, LIHWAP, for several reasons. First, LIHWAP has a 40-year track record of working with the same target population of households that are working with low income or no income and facing significant challenges with their basic necessities. It also has a long-term track record of our LIHWAP grantees working with utility providers and companies. And that has given those people who administer LIHWAP at the tribal level a lot of experience in negotiating consumer protections and looking through records and reconciling those records between what the LIHWAP agency is approving and paying versus what those utility providers are accepting and crediting to those customer accounts. and that includes small, medium, and in some cases, large-size utility providers. Second, the federal LIHWAP law, we think, provides an effective balance between setting some broad federal expectations and parameters to operate the program in, but also allowing enough flexibility so that each tribe and tribal organization can further refine the program rules and tailor those program rules to meet your local needs. We think a similar approach will work well for this new water program. Third, we assume that most tribes and tribal organizations will probably designate their existing team that's administering LIHWAP to also administer this new water program. And therefore, we think it makes sense to build upon what is already familiar and working well for the people who are administering LIHWAP and working with utility companies. So as Janelle mentioned, that is why at our office, the Division of Energy Assistance, the DEA, administers LIHWAP at the federal level and will also have responsibility for overseeing this new LIHWAP. Our startup team, whom you're hearing from today, has focused on two critical items needed to get the program going. First, we needed to flesh out in writing some federal rules, and we have done that. We've established some written terms and conditions that are specific to this new LIHWAP, the new water program. And they are in addition to the general mandatory terms and conditions, both of which are on the ACF website. So those terms and conditions walk through specific federal expectations of how you'll set eligibility and other aspects of your program. So really important to read those terms and conditions from start to finish. Second, we have drafted a template or model plan for the new LIHWAP grantees to use to put in writing their intentions for how they will run the program. And it really serves two important purposes. First is for you to be able to use it, the plan, to notify and collaborate with your local communities about, again, how you intend to run the program and obtain their input, get their feedback about what they need and whether those program rules will work for your community. Second, by you submitting that plan to our agency, we will be able to review that, understand how the program is working in your area, and keep that plan on hand for our record keeping and future reference purposes. So that model plan was posted to the new LIHWAP website on our agency's website, ACF, at the beginning of this week. It's available for your feedback and input. And Seth Hassett on our team will explain a little later on this call how we're seeking that public input on that plan. Next slide, please. So we are targeting a funding release date, an award date to each of you by the end of May, so next month. However, in order to achieve that date to release the funding, there are three critical responses that we need in writing from each tribal or tribal organization grantee for LIHWAP. First is we need the name and the contact information of the person who has been designated by your tribal chief or chairperson to administer this new water program, the LIHWAP. Those responses were first requested and due March 8th. We are still trying to obtain this information from about 33 tribal grantees that we were anticipating would be running programs. So we have continued to reach out to them, send reminders, and we have also engaged the services of a technical assistance contractor to reach out to them as well and really understand what might be causing that delay in that response, if there are some questions that you need our support working through to make decisions about who to designate on behalf of your tribe. Second, we need each of you, prospective grantees, to, as I said, read those new terms and conditions specific to the LIHWAP from start to finish, and make sure that that designated person signs at the bottom of those terms and conditions. We also need for your tribe to complete a federal standard form number 424M, like mandatory, which basically provides us the contact information for your designated official and some other information more generally about your tribe. I can see from the Q&A there are some questions about how to fill out some aspects of that form. We'll try to cover some of that today and have some follow-up about that after today's call. We released a written action transmittal this past Monday and sent it to all of the 150 tribes and tribal organizations that are current LIHWAP grantees this year, asking for you to send those two documents to us, the terms and conditions and the 424 form, by next Tuesday, April 27th. And in that action transmittal, which is posted to our new LIHWAP website, we include the terms and conditions as well as the 424 form for you to access. Now, we realize Tuesday, April 27th is coming up very soon, and this is a very short deadline for you to meet. And all I can say is that these are the two most critical items that our agency needs in order for us to move forward with releasing funding. And we really want to get to that point as quickly as possible so that you in turn can start to get your programs up and running as quickly as possible and get those benefit payments flowing to those water providers on behalf of households. Again, remembering this is an emergency program that is trying to help address these critical needs caused in large part by the pandemic. So once our agency receives that signed terms and conditions and the completed 424 form, we will then distribute the funding into your account in our financial system, and you will be authorized to obligate or draw down up to 15%, that's 15% of the grant, to use towards administrative costs to start up your program, to start fleshing out your written policies and procedures, to hire new staff if you need to do that, to build or adapt any tools or systems you might be using to negotiate vendor agreements with these different water providers that may be available to your tribe. So there's lots of things that go into running the program. We know that. We know you need those dollars to get those aspects of the program up and running. So that is our most urgent action item right now, is getting those two documents from you so that we can let you start accessing that initial 15% of the funding. After that, we will be asking for the submission of the plan, and ultimately, once we review and accept that, you will have access to the full grant so you can start making benefit payments. So sort of a two-step process for being able to draw down and access different parts of the grant. One important aspect of these new terms and conditions for the water program is that we have set very specific federal deadlines for both obligating the fund, and when I say obligating, I mean to legally bind or commit your tribe or tribal organization to pay a specific amount to a specific provider for a specific purpose. We also have a specific deadline for expending the funds. And by that, I mean to actually release or issue those payments against the obligations you've made. So an example of the difference between an obligation and an expenditure is that, for example, your tribal office administering the grants is going to be reviewing applications from households, and your intake staff will be making a decision about whether that household application is eligible for the program, and if yes, how much assistance you are going to award on behalf of that household. So the obligation in that example would be the approval of the household application for John Doe household for whatever the benefit amount is that you decide, whether that's 200 or 400 or 600 to their water provider. So it's that commitment that you're communicating to the household that we think you're eligible for X number of dollars of water assistance, and we promise to pay that on your behalf to the water company. That's the obligation, the legal commitment. Whereas the expenditure doesn't actually happen until your tribe, most likely your fiscal office, actually mails the check to the water provider, or if you have an electronic transfer system, actually makes that electronic transfer to the water company to pay that benefit amount to the water provider and expect that the water provider is crediting that person's account correctly. So usually there's a little bit of a time lag or difference between when you've made the promise to pay and when your tribe has actually made the payment. Next slide. So as Janelle and I have mentioned, many of the federal rules that govern the LIHWAP program for home heating and cooling assistance will also carry over and be applicable to how you will administer your new LIHWAP for water and wastewater assistance. So what we're trying to really highlight on this slide in this table is what's different. So we know the similarities, for example, include household eligibility, right? So for those of you who administer LIHWAP, you know that the federal rules say you have to set a cutoff, an income cutoff for households below which they have to be in order to qualify for the program. But you get to decide what that income cutoff is within a range that we lay out. So the greater of 150% of federal poverty guidelines or 60% of state median income, SMI. And you pick within that where you want to set your cutoff. So that rule will also apply to the water program, and likewise, you'll get to make that decision. You can also decide if you want to allow categorical eligibility. I'm not going to go into too many details about each of these aspects, but these are just examples of similarities in some of the flexibilities you will have to administer your water program like you do with LIHWAP. Another example of a similarity is where to set benefit amounts. So many of you might be familiar with the expression having a benefit matrix. We talk a lot about that in the LIHWAP world, and really that tool, that document is something that each tribe or tribal organization grantee creates and hopefully updates each year to lay out a way in which the tribal intake staff can decide how much of a benefit to provide to each household based on each household's unique situation. So in the LIHWAP law, in the federal level, there's no minimum benefit amount and there's no federal benefit, maximum benefit amount that we require. We leave that up to each of you to decide what that minimum and what that maximum benefit amount will be. We anticipate that you will do likewise for your new water program and decide what those minimum and maximum benefit amounts will be and how the intake staff will decide for each household how much benefits they qualify for, so that there's consistent written procedures that everyone can follow and understand. So again, those are all examples of similarities with how LIHWAP functions that you will do with your water program. this slide is really trying to highlight what are the differences. And here are the key differences. With regard to administrative cost caps, you heard me mention 15% is the cap. That is different than your administrative cost cap from LIHWAP. For tribal LIHWAP grantees providing heating and cooling assistance benefits, it's 20% of the first $20,000 of your LIHWAP grant. And then for any LIHWAP grant you get greater than $20,000, you get an additional 10% of that additional money. So for some tribes, that might work out to 11 or 12% overall. We decided that for the new water program, it made more sense to just have a higher administrative cost cap that will apply to all of the grantees. And so again, that's 15%. And part of that was really in recognition that because this is a brand new program, there are some new things you're going to have to do to establish some relationships with these water companies. There's going to be higher costs to get this up and running. A second difference, this one really wasn't a difference so much for tribes, it's about public input on that plan. So really for tribes, this is more of a similarity where we do want you to get some input from your community about your plan before you submit it to us. You do not have to have a tribal council hearing. You can if you want to, but we are not requiring it. I already talked a little bit about the obligation and expenditure deadlines. I want to go back to it a little more because it's so important. In LIHWAP, there's a 90% requirement that you obligate 90% of the LIHWAP grant within the same federal fiscal year in which we award it to you. And it doesn't matter from the federal law in terms of when that award comes in the year, you just have to look at it within that federal fiscal year period. Remembering that the federal fiscal year runs from October 1st through September 30th. So LIHWAP grantees are allowed to carry over up to 10% of that grant to obligate in the very next federal fiscal year. Whatever they don't obligate timely, they have to return back to us as what we call reallotment. For the water program, it's different. We decided that we don't really want to set a minimum obligation amount. We are, as you know, urgently trying to get these grant awards out this spring so you guys can get your programs up and running. But we know that's going to take a little bit of time to work out. So we don't want to put the extra pressure of a 90% or other requirement to meet by this September. So what we have done is set a standard obligation deadline for all states, territories, and tribes, which is that you need to obligate the money fully no later than September 30th, 2023, which is the end of federal fiscal year 2023. Now, even though we're giving you up until that time, again, the emphasis is this is an emergency program. So we are anticipating and expecting that you will be doing your very best to issue these benefit payments on behalf of households as quickly as possible and not necessarily holding on to it to use a year or two later. But we just wanted to give you a cushion because we know there's stuff that you need to work out. Regarding the expenditure deadline, when you actually pay out against those promises to pay, under the LIHWAP law, there's no standard deadline. Instead, the regulations require that each tribal grantee follow the same expenditure requirements that apply to tribal money. So if you were running a tribally funded program and the tribal rules say you have to expend within 1 year or 2 years, whatever your rules say, tribal-wide, that is what you must follow with your LIHWAP expenditure deadline, with your federal LIHWAP money. So what that means is it likely is a different expenditure deadline for every tribe. And that's definitely a lot for us to keep track of. So we decided for the water program to change that and to have one standard expenditure deadline for all states, territories, and tribes. And that expenditure deadline is December 30th, 2023. So what that means, and what you'd want to make sure your fiscal teams understand, is that your tribe would have essentially 3 months or 90 days after the close of federal fiscal year 2023 to make sure they've drawn down all the money that they need to liquidate and pay out against all the obligations you made up until September 30th, 2023. Regarding targeting of the benefits for households, there's a similarity, but one tweak is that you have to target assistance and vary the amount of the benefits to households under both programs. But for LIHWAP, obviously the targeting is focused on households that pay more of their income towards their home heating and cooling services. Whereas under the water program, we're looking at which households pay more of their income towards their home drinking water and wastewater services. Regarding continuity of services, this is really getting at this idea of disconnections, loss of service. So under LIHWAP, it's strongly encouraged that grantees are trying to do their best to make sure that the LIHWAP benefit will actually restore services if they've already been disconnected, or if the household is facing a disconnection soon of their heating or cooling service, that the benefit will avoid that disconnection. Or if they're using deliverable fuels, that they can get that shipment of deliverable fuels timely so that they don't run out. With the water program, it's actually an explicit separate term and condition. It's a specific term that you will establish policies and procedures that prioritize those households that are already disconnected or otherwise lacking their drinking water or wastewater services, and focusing on them first. As Janelle mentioned, there's some differences in which regulations apply, so I won't take a lot of time about that, but I just want you to know that, again, for the new water program, you don't have to worry about Part 96, which is regarding HHS block grants, but you will need to become familiar with all of Part 75. We have the citation on the slide, 45 CFR, which is the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 75, to carry out the Federal Uniform Administrative Guidance that was put out by the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. The last point I really want to make on this slide is that the funding calculations in terms of how we will award money across different tribes is different for the two programs. So for those of you who are tribal LIHWAP grantees, you're used to having the option of negotiating what we call a tribe-state agreement with any of the states within which your tribal lands cross in order to get a higher grant award amount than we would otherwise be permitted to award you under the federal LIHWAP statute. Now, those agreements also serve other important purposes, like how you might exchange data between your tribal program and your LIHWAP state program to avoid duplication of benefits, giving the same household a benefit from the state and the tribal program, or other aspects of coordination between your programs. But oftentimes that funding piece is a central part of those agreements. Why that's important is because under LIHWAP, the amount that we fund for each directly funded tribal grantee is set aside out of what we would otherwise award to that state. In the water program, Congress set up the formula differently in the legislation. So in the water program, it's not that your tribal grant is coming out of the state grant, but instead there's just an overall set aside from the total grant for all tribes. And that one bucket of money is capped at 3% of the total funding for the program. And so because of that, there is not going to be this process of tribal state agreements to try to negotiate a higher amount that we would award to you. We just have the formula, and based on who submits the documentation, we will issue that funding. Next slide, please. So here are some new slides compared to Tuesday that are really focused on tribal issues. And this really, I think, was emphasized by some of the questions and feedback that we heard on Tuesday. So we just want to emphasize that to be eligible to be a directly funded tribal LIHWAP grantee, you must already be a current directly funded tribal LIHWAP grantee. And that is why we focused our communications on the 150 tribes and tribal organizations that are current 2021 tribal LIHWAP grantees that we have a direct relationship with through that grant award. We know that tribes, some tribes own the company that is providing either the drinking water and or the wastewater services for tribal members. And that is fine. That does not disqualify your tribe or tribal organization from administering this new grant. But the tribe must ensure that there are conflict of interest procedures in writing that include a separation of duties between the tribally owned water provider and the other part of the tribal government, whatever agency that the tribal chief designates to manage this new federal water assistance grant program. So the bottom line is it must not be the same person or the same office or agency within the tribe that is both operating the water company and also administering the grant. But just the fact that the tribe owns the water company does not disqualify the tribe from eligibility. We can still work with you. Tribes that are currently receiving LIHWAP services this year through a tribal consortium that, for whatever reason, may not want to receive the water service through that consortium must send us something in writing that communicates you would rather be served through the state water program instead of the consortium. But we don't have a process to be able to take on additional tribal grantees for the water program. Next slide. So following up on that a little more regarding tribal consortia, again, only the tribal organizations, the tribal consortia that are currently directly funded by ACF to provide LIHWAP services for 2021 are eligible to apply for and administer this new LIHWAP grant. We know that usually that means you are entering into or receiving tribal resolutions from all the different tribes and native villages that your consortium is going to be serving. And we know that that takes time. that usually involves a tribal council process, and those hearings are only held oh so often. It's really up to each of you in terms of whether it makes more sense to try to just amend the existing LIHWAP resolutions, or if there's just going to be an entirely new resolution. So we defer to you on whatever rules the consortium, the individual tribal villages, and tribes have governing resolutions. Our office will do our best to provide consultation support to you as needed, particularly on these initial documents that are required to get the funding flowing, those terms and conditions and the 424. You can submit these updated or new tribal resolutions later on with your LIHWAP plan later this spring. So you don't have to worry about sending all the resolutions by next Tuesday. We know that would not be feasible. As I mentioned earlier, we were very fortunate to be able to partner with Lux Consulting, LUX, Lux, who provides training and technical assistance services to tribal grantees of the Community Services Block Grant Program, CSBG. And so they have already been reaching out to many tribes regarding this LIHWAP program and trying to understand, what help you need and designating the proper person and completing these forms and what have you. So please, if you get a phone call or an email from someone with Lux, please pay attention to that. Please know that they are reaching out to you on our behalf. These last two slides, I'm really not going to take much time with. These are just kind of capturing the process. This first slide is showing steps that we've already completed, that I've already discussed. And if we move to the next slide, these are steps in the process that are still coming up. And so again, getting those terms and conditions, getting the 424 in order for you to get that 15% of the grant. And then ultimately we will send you the plan to complete and send back to us so you can get the rest of the grant. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Seth Hassett, who will walk us through the survey and the other ways that we're trying to get your feedback in this process. Seth?
Okay, thank you, Lauren. So as Lauren mentioned, this process is one that we are both working to do an efficient startup while still obtaining information from grantees, getting you some initial funding to get the effort started, while also tailoring and organizing our technical assistance efforts. And so what I would frame up to you is that to help manage the input from an extensive array of stakeholder organizations, OCS has created a survey tool to help obtain input in a structured manner. The survey will provide input and help OCS and its partners in creating guidance materials, estimated timelines, and designing technical assistance materials, as well as refining a model plan that will be used by tribes as the second stage of this process. And we also hope that in answering this survey, it will help tribes and other grantees to begin considering some of the key issues that will need to be included in your planning efforts and your initial operations plans. So a link to the survey is on this slide, and it was also sent out to potential grantees on Monday, April 19th through a Dear Colleague letter. And it is also available on our website. In order to have your results included in our initial review, the survey needs to be completed by Tuesday, April 27th. We know that's a tight timeline, but we're not going to be able to include results in our initial analysis after that date due to our own very tight schedule. That survey begins with some questions regarding your role and the organization you represent. This is really important because it's going to help us to organize the responses better and understand who is sharing what, and also to sort the difference between input from states, tribes, and other national organizations or groups that represent a particular set of organizations. And there will also be some opportunities for general comments for any areas that are not explicitly addressed in that survey. You can cut and paste a response from another document, and the response isn't timed, so it's possible to go in, review the survey, research specific items, and return to give your response. There's also an optional field where you can provide contact information at the end if you would like OCS to be able to follow up with clarifications or find out more about an item in your response. One moment here. So now we're going to talk in some more depth about what we're asking for in the survey. And just to highlight that, we begin with asking about an understanding of drinking water and wastewater needs in your tribal jurisdiction or service area. And we then ask for information about any existing water assistance programs or supports that you currently administer. So if you already have any sort of low-income assistance or assistance to help particular households that are facing challenges in paying a water bill, you would identify that. And then next, you would identify any challenges and opportunities that you see in the adaptation of your existing policies, procedures in areas such as household eligibility, in terms of adapting the LIHWAP criteria, targeting benefits to low-income households with the highest water burden. If you are going to be selecting any sub-providers or would be doing that, what would be the challenges in adapting any relationships you already have under LIHWAP, if you're working with different organizations, any tribal regulations or rulemaking that needs to take place. And again, we'll talk more about this in another slide, but really, where can you expedite the process using any emergency authorities or any other ways to expedite the process so that we can get funds into the hands and paid on behalf of households as efficiently as possible. We'll also have questions about vendor agreements or payment arrangements, consumer protections, data collection and reporting. And we have some questions that are just about tribal government needs. Everything you answer is, of course, as a respondent, a tribal government respondent or a tribal organization will presumably be focused on tribal government needs. But we do ask this of everybody who's responding to the survey to be able to understand different lenses and different perspectives. We want to know your anticipated technical assistance needs and how long, what's the timeframes you expect it will take before benefits can be delivered. So just, we're going to move relatively quickly here, but the survey does seek input about your understanding of current drinking wastewater needs. And this is really answered in terms of your tribal service area, but some of the areas we've included for thinking about are things like cost and affordability, quality, safety, and issues or challenges related to disconnection policies, late fees, home liens, or any unique issues about the service delivery systems in your service area. And while these LIHWAP funds are directed to a very specific use, we encourage you to outline a wide array of issues and needs because it will help identify areas where we should be supporting coordination and information exchange with other related efforts. So as we mentioned that if you have any existing programs, water supports in your tribal lands, we would just be interested in knowing not just the nature of those, what the funding source of it is, does it serve the entire tribal area or does it serve just specific communities, and does it have any specific eligibility requirements that might be of interest? Again, if you do have something of that nature, if you have a website, provide a link to that because we would like to look into that and be aware of it. So the next thing that we wanted to talk about is that after you've provided information on your organization, you will be providing more detail on the adaptation of existing policies and procedures. And I've shared a little bit about this already, but really we just want to know what's unique in terms of taking primarily your LIHWAP grant program, adapting it to the context of LIHWAP. There will be a lot of things that are familiar in terms of the questions and language. The eligibility criteria are, as we shared, virtually identical, with the exception that if a LIHWAP household is eligible, they may be automatically eligible or can be determined to be eligible for this water assistance. And so to any extent, we encourage you to read through that section, look at the terms and conditions, and then think about any challenges, issues, or opportunities that come with adapting your current policies. And then next, we'll talk a bit about, again, technical assistance needs. And the opportunity that's here is we've provided a variety of options you can select. Some of these are examples that we've highlighted, whether it's templates for vendor agreements, model LIHWAP plans, benefit matrix that Lauren mentioned earlier, and then also sort of how you would like to receive these services, whether it's consultations, webinars, or other tools. We encourage you to kind of check anything that's applicable, prioritize what you think is most important, and then add anything you think would be beneficial, not just in terms of the content area, but in terms of how it would be most effective for us to provide that assistance to you. And then last in this area is having answered all of those questions, and in the earlier sections, we're going to ask you to kind of consider expedited procedures and how long it will take you, you expect it to begin making payments on behalf of households after receiving your initial award. The understanding here should be that because these are emergency needs, the goal will be to begin making payments on behalf of households as efficiently and responsibly as possible. And we recognize this will be an estimate, but it will help us to start getting an estimate from the perspective of different tribes and parties. You also have an opportunity to provide a narrative description of any factors that would affect your timeline. So we encourage you to provide additional description if you think some benefits might be delivered very quickly in your current systems and others may take longer. If you think that you can provide an explanation for that and where it might be helpful to get technical assistance from us. And then the last thing for me to talk about is just tribal government needs, unique issues. And everything we've talked about here is through the lens of a tribal lands, tribal governments, tribal jurisdictions. But we have questions that are related specifically to the unique aspects of tribal needs. And obviously these are relevant. Anyone can respond, but we are really particularly interested in people who are on this call, what your input in this area is. And it's an opportunity for an open-ended response. Use the narrative section to provide what you think is important, what's unique about your needs. We provided some examples to sort of trigger the conversation, such as unique concerns about perhaps the availability of data in some cases, the status of water utilities. Lauren mentioned if the tribal government has ownership or administers some part of a water utility, describe any specific issues you might see there. Anything about the water delivery infrastructure and other issues such as land ownership, or even whether there are specific households that receive water bills and what questions or issues you have for us. This is something we are very interested in, particularly from tribal governments, because there are a lot of unique concerns, and we are currently formulating guidance and training around this in order to meet the statutory requirements while also being conscious of unique needs in tribal areas. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Christina Clark, and she's going to talk about some pending program issues that we are still working to resolve, as well as other information you need to know.
Thank you, Seth. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone on the line. I want to start by acknowledging that we know that there are a variety of unique concerns and potential needs related to tribal communities. We are working on exploring program decisions related to some of these, and currently we're evaluating issues related to delivered water costs, well and septic systems, and minimum allocations to tribes. We know there may be factors that we may not have considered or are unaware of related to these and other topics, and we really encourage you all to provide feedback related to these topics within the survey. We will continue to explore these issues and provide updates as they are available. So we covered a lot of information today, and I want to present a few key takeaways for you to keep in mind. The first is about the designation letters. So an action transmittal was sent via an email to chief executives of eligible tribes, and we're really requesting the designation of a responsible official that will be empowered to submit the tribal plan and also to sign any assurances related to the LIHWAP program. The designations were originally requested to be sent by March 8th. And while we received the majority of designation letters from eligible entities, there are still a little over 30 letters that have not yet been received. The designation of a responsible governing official is the first step to receiving a LIHWAP award. And if you have not submitted the designation letter, we request that you send it to the tribal email address as soon as possible. And I will provide that email address for you at the end of these reminders. The next item that I want to emphasize is the LIHWAP survey. And once again, just strongly encourage each of you to complete that survey as a follow-up to this session. The survey is an opportunity for you to share your knowledge and experience related to several key program design components. And the information that you all provide will help us to understand and respond to the unique circumstances in your tribal communities. We will collect the responses and use them to create guidance materials, to estimate timeframes, design technical assistance materials, and also to refine the grantee plan. As Seth mentioned, a Dear Colleague letter was sent Monday, April 19th, and it includes the link to the survey. There's also a link to the terms and conditions and the model plan in that correspondence. We recommend that you review the terms and conditions and the model plan prior to completing the survey, because there are sections of the survey that are asking for feedback related to both of those documents. If you did not receive the Dear Colleague letter, it can be found on our webpage under the Policy and Guidance section. And there are also links to these documents near the top of the LIHWAP webpage, and I will show you that webpage in just a moment. The survey is administered through SurveyMonkey, which is fairly easy to use. Once you click on the link or add the link to your web browser, you'll be directly brought to the first page of the survey and you can begin to add your information. Once again, as a reminder, the survey will be open until Tuesday, April 27th, and all responses must be submitted by that time in order for us to review your comments and questions. The next item I want to highlight are the terms and conditions and the SF 424M. And after submission of the designation letter, signing and returning the terms and conditions and the SF 424M are the next steps that eligible LIHWAP grantees must complete. The terms and conditions were also sent via email on Monday, April 19th, and they were sent to the designated contacts that we had received as of that date. Those documents can also be found on the LIHWAP webpage. And just to let you know, the terms and conditions are in final drafts, and the document must be signed by the person that is identified in the designation letter prior to LIHWAP allocations being released. Acceptance of the terms and conditions, acceptance of the terms and conditions and the 424M will initiate the allocation and access to the administrative portion of the LIHWAP award, which is 15% of the total grant. And also just to point out, it has come to our attention that the SF424M link online may not be accessible in the Chrome web browser. So when you're accessing that document, if you're not able to open it in Chrome, we just ask you to use Internet Explorer or Firefox browsers to enable access to that document. The next item that I want to mention is the model plan. And a link to the model plan was in that Dear Colleague letter from Monday. To expand a little bit more on that, the model plan is currently in draft form, and we are really requesting your feedback on that draft. There is a section of the survey that is dedicated to feedback on the plan, and we ask that you complete that based on your assessment of the draft that is online at this time. So we once again are asking for you to complete the survey by April 27th. And I just want to acknowledge that we do recognize the turnaround for the initial feedback is it presents a really tight timeline. So the timeline is expedited due to the emergency need for this program and our desire to get the funding out and for us to provide you all the ability to start to stand up your programs as quickly as possible. We really want to get that feedback as quickly as possible, and we're seeking emergency expedited approval for the use of the grantee plan. However, once the survey closes, there will be other opportunities to provide feedback, as there will be a federal register in relation to the plan and a public comment process. We will do the initial emergency approval of the plan after we have reviewed and considered the comments received in the survey. And then the complete and final version of the plan, we will ask that each of you submit to the Office of Community Services, and it must be approved before allocations above the 15% administrative portion can be drawn down. As I mentioned, the webpage is a really good place to find information related to the LIHWAP program. You can find previously released action transmittals and communications, as well as future updates that will be posted there. And I want to take a minute just to show you all the website. Just a moment. Okay. Hopefully you all can see that now. And so you can find it on the page of the Office of Community Services. If you go to programs here and drop down, you'll see the LIHWAP option. And if you select on that, it will take you to the LIHWAP page. And at the top of the page, we've got just a little intro about the program. And then if you scroll down just a bit, you'll see links to some of the important documents that are highlighted for use in the coming week. The link to the LIHWAP survey is here. And then right underneath that, you'll see the link to the grantee plan, the draft plan. Terms and conditions, there's 2 sets here, and the one at the top has a specialized signature block for tribes. The one for states is underneath that. And then we've already got the presentation slides from Tuesday's presentation here. So if you'd like to take a look at those, they're here. Okay, and I'll just scroll down a little bit for you. The laws and regulations related to the program are here, but I want to click on this policy and guidance link and just show you some of the information here and point out that, oops. I want to point out that the action transmittal for tribes is highlighted in the title. You'll see the specific correspondence for tribes. Similar correspondence for states, but if you look in the titles here, you'll be able to designate which ones are specific to tribal communities. And then the Dear Colleague letters that we've sent with some of those additional links to the survey, if you want to take a look and read the background that was provided, those can be found here. We'll just switch back now. Finally, I want to provide you with some contact information related to the LIHWAP program. As Lauren mentioned, we have a contractor that's supporting our technical assistance on this program, and I just want to make you aware of their names so that you'll recognize them in the event that they try to reach out to you. Lux Consulting is the contractor organization. And the representatives that may reach out to you are Nicole Oxidine and Layla Titanbaum. And Nicole or Layla, I apologize if I mispronounced your names. I haven't actually had a chance to meet them yet. But those are the folks who will reach out to you from Lux Consulting, particularly if you have not submitted a designation letter as of yet, they will be reaching out to you. Due to the high volume of questions about the establishment of this emergency program, we ask that you note and use the designated communication channels. So the first line of communication is that LIHWAP survey, and we will be assessing those and reviewing all comments that are provided by the April 27th deadline. If you are a prospective tribal grantee, please use the LIHWAP tribes email address, and that's there on the screen for you. If you are a stakeholder, please just use the regular liwap@acf.hhs.gov, and you'll see that email address as well. Just as a reminder, the LIHWAP tribes email address is for prospective grantees. That concludes the presentation portion of this session. And at this time, I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Edie Wu, who will begin the question and answer portion.
Hi, everyone. So just a reminder, please submit your questions in the Q&A box. We've already taken a look through the ones that are in there, and so we will answer some of them, and I will turn that over to Janelle George in a second. I also want to just quickly let folks know that a few of the questions that are just about where materials are available have been answered, and you should be able to see them. And as Christina mentioned, all the resources that we mentioned will be on our website, and that includes the slides from today, which will be shared later today or tomorrow, and the recordings and transcripts of both sessions today and Tuesday, which will be made available as soon as possible. And with that, I will turn it over to Janelle to kick off the question and answer session.
Okay, thank you so much, Edie. As we mentioned before, I think we recognize that there are some questions and issues that are specific and sensitive to tribes. And we also know that there are questions and sensitivities on special issues regarding water, including everything from households that use wells as their water source, wells that perhaps are operated by a third party, and also households that perhaps are using communal water utilities and they don't receive a separate bill. So just know that we are aware and we are evaluating the legislative instruction that we've received and working with our internal offices to come to some resolution on these issues. Again, we do encourage you to provide feedback via the survey on these types of issues and any others that you are aware of so that we can make sure that we take those into account. So what I'm going to do is start with a few of the questions, and then I will at some point turn it over to one of my colleagues to follow up. And bear with me because I am going to read the questions as written. The first question, are costs for infrastructure, for example, repair of pipes, wells, sinks, etc., allowable? So we know that, these are not allowable costs. LIHWAP funds cannot be used for any type of plumbing repairs or infrastructure repairs. The funds from LIHWAP are for the sole purpose of reducing arrearages and rates charged to eligible low income households. And while we know that the administration has other infrastructure proposals that are related to things like replacing lead pipes and updating plumbing infrastructure, this particular funding is not for that purpose. Next question, are late fees and reconnection charges allowable? Yes, these are allowable costs because they are considered part of the overall efforts to address arrearages in water bills. And so that is something that would be supported and allowable. Can a household apply through both a state and a tribal program for LIHWAP benefits? So a household would be eligible to apply to the tribal LIHWAP if the tribe is administering the LIHWAP program. If the tribe is not administering the program, then the state would be responsible for conducting outreach and making intake services accessible to the tribe. Tribal members, if you will. Is this funding designed for the tribe to use for the tribe's water systems, et cetera, as needed? Or is this money specifically to be used to help offset individual tribal members' water bills? Again, the funding is designated to help individual households with water and wastewater costs and arrearages. And those funds are going directly to the public water utilities and wastewater treatment works companies. is it okay that the tribe owns the water provider company and funds be paid to the water provider company from the tribally administered LIHWAP program? Yes, this sounds similar to something I believe that that Lauren addressed a little bit earlier in the presentation. So the fact that a tribe owns a water company or is the water provider, that in and of itself would not disqualify the tribe from administering the program or making a payment to the tribally owned water company. However, the key takeaway here is that it's important to make sure that there are some internal controls that are in place. An example of that would be conflict of interest policies. And there also needs to be clear, separate distinction and separation of duties between the part of the tribal government that's actually going to be administering the program and perhaps issuing those payments as compared to the tribal government or that owns the water provider and receives the credits on behalf of those household accounts. Another question, if we do not qualify, would it be beneficial to the tribe to qualify as a grantee for future funding of the assistance programs? So it sounds like what's being asked is if you are a tribe that is not currently a fiscal year 21 LIHEAP grantee, would it be beneficial for you to apply to be a LIHEAP grantee for purposes of accessing LIHWAP funding for this water program? If you're not, as we said, a fiscal year 21 LIHEAP grantee, right now there's no really additional way, or there's no additional intake process for eligibility for new grantees to the LIHWAP program. Because of the legislative directions to follow existing processes and procedures for purposes of expediting this process and the implementation of this program, given it is an emergency program. You may be able to apply for the LIHWAP in the future if additional funding is appropriated and based off of the guidance and mandate that is noted in that legislation, but right now there is no capacity or ability to take in new LIHWAP grantee applications at the moment. We did also receive a question regarding, I believe, designation letters. And if you could just give me just one moment. I can tell, it looks like this question is about what happens if you've submitted a designation letter and for whatever reason, the person or persons that have been designated as the authorizing official, that changes. I can tell you, we do recognize that happens, there is turnover. And so we are going to be sending out some guidance on how you would go about updating that contact information and establishing and clarifying who the authorizing official is. And that guidance will be coming out later next week or at the beginning of the following week. So now what I'd like to do is I'm going to turn the Q&A portion over to one of my colleagues, and I think I will turn it over to Lauren.
Hi, thanks. Trying to unmute and put my video back on. So, we are getting many questions, probably more than we will be able to address on this call. And we do want to be mindful that we're making an opportunity for all of you to also provide feedback. So I think we're going to transition to that pretty quickly. There are just a couple questions that I can touch on briefly before that. I did put in the chat box links to 2 different guidance documents that are still in effect regarding the parameters within which you can set household income eligibility. Every year, once per year, we issue 2 different guidance documents called information memoranda that list the federal poverty guidelines that are applicable and the state median income estimates, and then you decide where you want to set it within those parameters. So right now, the guidance that is on our website for LIHWAP is effective until we issue the next set of guidance, which will be coming out shortly. And basically, grantees can continue to use these existing ones from 2020 up through the end of fiscal year 2021, or if they want to transition to the new 2021 guidelines when those come out shortly, they can do that. So if you have further questions, we can certainly talk offline about that. A related question I saw that came in the chat box was, can eligibility be limited to just existing LIHWAP households or customers? And so I do want to clarify that no, there's a term and condition that mirrors some of the language from the federal LIHWAP statute regarding income eligibility, and that grantees have to at least establish an income cutoff for the household income and make that an option for households to apply based on household income. But in addition to that, they can also decide some applications based on categorical eligibility, but you cannot limit your eligibility to just categorical eligible programs. So what do I mean by categorical eligible programs? In the federal LIHWAP statute, there's maybe 4 programs that you as the grantee can decide, okay, if at least one person in the household is a current recipient of that program, we can decide, yes, they are automatically eligible for LIHWAP. And we are permitting you to do the same with your new water program. Some examples of those programs you can choose from are SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, and SSI, the Supplemental Social Security Income, as well as some means-tested veterans programs. The one difference with the water program is that we have added LIHWAP as a program you can select for categorical eligibility. So can you decide to make a household automatically eligible for the water benefit because they are a current LIHWAP household? Yes, you can. You can choose in your policies, your written policies, to allow automatic eligibility based on receipt of LIHWAP this year. However, you cannot limit it to being the only way a household can apply or receive water assistance. So if you have follow-up questions about that, please let us know and we can talk more offline. I think I'm going to pause there on the questions and turn it back to Edie to transition to the listening part, but time permitting, we'll come back to more questions. Edie?
Great, awesome. So for this listening session, this is an opportunity for folks to share their feedback or comments or questions with us verbally. Due to the volume of the questions, and in the interest of hearing from more folks, we won't be responding directly to your comments, but we do really value this opportunity to hear from you. And so how this will work is, if you are on your laptop or on the Zoom screen, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little button that says raise hand. And then if you raise hand, it will show the people who raised their hands to me in the order that you've raised your hands. And then I will let you know who the next person who is up to speak is. And then I will unmute you, and then you also have to unmute your mic from your end. And so right now, there's one person with their hand up, and it is Robert Anala. And so Robert, I'll unmute you, and you will have the chance to speak for 3 minutes. I will also share a timer so everyone knows how much time is left. And then Yeah, and I encourage other folks to raise their hands, and let me share the timer. And Robert, I have unmuted you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I have a very simple question, I hope. Um, there's a lot of feedback, so I don't know if somebody's unmuted. My question is regarding the eligibility of wastewater services. Is the
Hey,
septic
Robert,
service?
you might be you might be using two different audio sources. And then there might be some feedback from your phone and your computer. So you should mute one of those. I've just muted, I'll mute myself and all the panelists, and let's try this again so we can hear you. Now you're fully on mute. Try unmuting.
Okay,
Sorry.
how's that?
I think this is better.
Okay, let me try this.
Robert, is there any chance that you're using both your phone and your computer? Because if so, you should turn off the audio for one completely. Like you should turn off the speaker and the audio, and the speaker and the audio on your computer if you're, say, calling in on your phone. Okay, try it now. Oh, I see you are. The audio. In the meantime, if other folks want to raise their hands to join the queue to share feedback, that would also be great. And then we'll wait a little bit and see if anyone has feedback to give. Yep, I see one more person in line. And then if there isn't much interest in providing verbal feedback, we can also return to the Q&A session because we know there were a lot of questions. But in the meantime, Robert, let's see, I see you're connected to audio again. Do you want to try unmuting again? Third time's the charm.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. No echo. Okay. Perfect.
Okay, let me fix my volume here because I just hung up the phone. I apologize for that.
No worries.
Okay, so my question really was just simply to the services that are eligible, water, and it appears that wastewater is also an eligible service. The question I have is septic services also included as a part of the wastewater category?
So as you mentioned, we can't respond directly to your question, but we appreciate you sharing that. Did you want to continue speaking or yield the rest of your time to move on to the next person in the listening session?
That was the only question I had. Thank you. I'll look out for a response through another time.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Greg Gare. And I apologize if I mispronounced your name.
You pronounced it? Thank you very much. My name is Greg Gear. I'm the Executive Director for Northern California Indian Development Council. We operate a 48 tribe consortium in California. All of our tribes are really relatively small. I mean, might even be considered very small by national standards. And the consortium is what gives us the capability to put together a program of sufficient size and scale to be able to operate a LIHEAP for some of these very small tribes. We literally have tribes that get a few $100s a year in a LIHEAP allocation. I am somewhat concerned about the ability to program, to develop a program without knowing what the actual allocations are going to be. The 15% limit, while it's nice that it's up from 10%, still presents me with some, if it's interpreted, if admin is interpreted the same way as in LIHEAP, it's concerning. In the LIHEAP definition of admin, that would be the direct, what I would call the program staff, evaluating the intakes, making the pledges, dealing with the vendor arrangements, taking care of all of the direct program responsibilities. That's part of the 15%, their wage, their fringe, the overhead for that person, and then also the negotiated indirect cost rate that comes to pay for fiscal and HR and insurance and audits and everything else that's part of our operation. All those components have to come out of the 15%. When you're a small grantee, that 15% goes very quickly. You have to keep enough money to be able to operate through the year. If I was to draw down that 15% and use it for the very detailed pre-planning efforts going across the whole state and trying to come up with who the water providers are, what are the local problems in each of 48 micro tribes, turfs, what are the costs, what are the individual situations, I would spend the entire 15% before I put out a single voucher, made a single pledge to help the low-income family. I would have no money left to be able to operate the program. So this is concerning, and I would love to work with your technical assistance consultants and hear how other people are going to deal with this limitation, or if there's a different definition of admin under this program than there is in LIHEAP. I'd also like to get some clarity on the CSBG issue. In LIHEAP, you're not allowed to use CSBG funds to augment or expand or enhance the program. It's statutorily prohibited. Does that prohibition exist for the LIHWAP as well? Or are we allowed to use our CSBG to leverage this program like we do with many other programs with CSBG outside of LIHEAP? The last thing in my 22 seconds left is that this is a very urban and suburban program. You've already noted that people on wells and their own water systems and their septic tanks are basically going to be disenfranchised by this program. And that's a discussion I hope we can continue to have as we move through this, and even perhaps getting additional congressional action to not disenfranchise our rural native communities. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So at the moment, there's actually no one else who's raised their hands to speak. And so I think at this point, what might be the best course of action is for us to return to the question and answer session and answer a few more questions. But I will be on the lookout for if any more folks raise their hands. And then if you do, we'll pause the Q&A, or I'll kind of chime in, and then we will return to that. But with that, I think we should go back to Lauren Christopher for some of the questions that we received to answer some more of them.
And Lauren, before you get started, I do just want to reiterate, and so some of you can be thinking about this as Lauren is going through additional Q&As. The comment section is not just limited to questions, but if there are other areas regarding the implementation of this program that perhaps are unique or sensitive to tribes that we have not brought up or you have not heard anyone else mention, please do make us aware of that, and you can use the time that we have set aside for comments to do just that. So I'll turn it back over to Lauren, and then Edie will monitor raised hands, and we'll probably go back and forth. Lauren?
Right, thank you. Edie, do you want to give one more reminder about how people raise their hand on the Zoom platform? Sorry, you might be on mute.
I was. So if you look at the bottom, there should be mute, stop video, participants, Q&A, polls, and then there should be little hand symbol. And if you click on that, you will, raise your hand to speak. Oh, actually, we went through all of that, and I actually do see a raised hand. So it is a Susan Schrader. Susan, I'm going to unmute you, and you should unmute yourself as well. And let's see. Oh, I can hear you.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Susan Schrader. I'm the director of the Oglala Sioux Tribe's LIHWAP and CSBG programs. And I'm really, really thankful that 3 of our 9 communities will benefit from this program. They have, so with the Oglala Sioux tribe is unique in that we are a treaty tribe and we hold fast to our land and our water rights. So we have some legal and also some cultural, historical, and beliefs and practices where our water situation and our payment situation is unique because the majority of tribal members hang on to those treaty rights where we're not supposed to pay for our water, and so we have some caveats and some really unique situations and views from our people and inaction by the tribal government. So that will be documented in the survey, and one good thing is I'm coordinating. One thing that it's going to do is I'm going to meet with the director of water resources who manages the tribal water code and has done like a survey. So what we have is we have 9 reservation districts. We're a large reservation, 100 miles by 100 miles, approximately 20 to 40,000 members that reside here. Okay, so our two of our larger communities, please, Pine Ridge and excuse me, Pine Ridge, Wakbomini, and Martin. Martin is a quasi-jurisdiction place where there's a lot of deeded land, so the city charges tribal members for water use. And then the tribe has a company that manages the water and sewer system in Pine Ridge and part of Wakbomini district. But the rest, the large majority of the land base, which like Mr. Gare said, our reservation is very rural. So we have individual wells, we have the Wichoni water project that brings water in from the Missouri. And so those are all private expenses and then we have IHS and a nonprofit involvement and like with assistance with wells and then people have to pay for repairs. So I just want to reiterate what Mr. Gare said. We have a unique situation because we're rural. We have our legal and moral and cultural beliefs that we don't have to pay for water, that our water rights should be explicit and and that's a belief, and also it's kind of it's a practice by tribal government. However, we have 3 communities where people have large arrearage amounts, and one area in the La Creek district, and they'll get cut off, and so we're working. So it's an opportunity to work with all the water officials, understand our policy and procedures, look at people. So we'll primarily be as is, if there's no change, and with congressional's intent, we'll be working with primarily 3 of our 9 districts because there's only 3 districts that pay a water and sewer provider. So that's all I have to share. I'm just thankful that our people have resources, and it's sad that it took the pandemic to make them available, but they're here. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Susan. So at this point, I will actually turn it back over to Lauren because we don't have other folks who have raised their hands. And just as a reminder, if you would like to speak, hit that little hand symbol, and then I will chime in, and then we can come back to the listening session. But in the meantime, back over to Lauren for answering a few more questions.
Thank you, Edie, and thank you to Susan Schrader from the Oglala Sioux. These are exactly the kinds of comments and feedback that we really want to hear and understand in better detail. So, we have roughly 10 to 15 minutes left of this session. I really encourage you, for those still on the line, to raise your hands, and if you feel comfortable, share a little more about what the situation looks like in your area, so that we can really understand any differences in, both water, wastewater, and anything that might be unique to tribal or rural communities. So again, just hit that raise hand button at the bottom of your screen so that Edie can be checking that, and Edie can interrupt me at any time that she sees a raised hand. In the meantime, so there was for those of you following the chat part of this, there was an exchange about benefit amounts. So, part of what I put in the chat box was regarding responsibilities you'll have as a grantee for setting income eligibility for households applying for assistance. Another factor is, okay, once you decide who's eligible or not, for those that are eligible, how much assistance do you provide them? And so the federal rules for LIHWAP and water are the same insofar as we are leaving that decision to you to decide what works best for your community regarding those benefit amounts. We are not setting any sort of minimum or maximum benefit amount. You are required, again, to give different benefit amounts to different households based on some sort of process, matrix, whatever you want to call it, that considers the household income and considers how much they're paying towards their drinking water and wastewater services, as well as any sort of issue regarding disconnection or being without those services. So those are really just the key things from the federal side. So we have not set a due date yet regarding the model plan. As we've talked about today, right now we are just trying to get feedback from all of you about the plan, and that feedback time will close end of day on Tuesday the 27th. We'll make any further refinements of that plan and get final federal approval from the Office of Management and Budget to then release the final plan to all of you and get those submissions a little further down the road. Some of the other questions I've seen coming in relate to this issue of if the tribe does not charge households for water and wastewater, how will that work? And I would just preliminarily say that, again, our interpretation of the legislation from Congress is that there is some sort of bill that is in past due status or that the household needs help with in paying. And so, we will definitely continue to look into this issue that may be more unique for tribes regarding treaty rights and water issues. But for now, we're working on the assumption there's a bill to a third party, particularly those bills that are past due and jeopardizing that service. There's a question here about, is it a requirement to run drinking water separately from wastewater, or can it be combined, since it may create a lot of confusion for citizens and the water providers to try to track down how the benefits are being applied? So our understanding so far is that in many cases, it may be the same company or provider who is offering both the drinking water and the wastewater. In fact, some of them may just have like one amount that they charge for both services, and you really can't separate out the two. And then in other parts of the country, it may be two separate companies, one that provides the wastewater and one that provides the drinking water, and the household is getting two separate bills. So we are not imposing any sort of federal requirement regarding, whether you pay drinking water first versus wastewater. Those are decisions we are leaving to you, the grantee, to decide. If it is just one bill for both services from the company, that's fine from our perspective. But we just want to make sure people are clear that both drinking water and wastewater services are qualifying allowable purposes for the benefits. There's a question here about income eligibility. I think I've covered that a few different ways, although there was a related question about categorical eligibility and whether the FDIRP, the Food Distribution Indian Reservation Program, is one of those programs. That is currently not one of the programs that we listed as being a categorical eligible option, but thank you for flagging that program, and we will certainly consider that as part of our guidance in TNTA in the future in terms of how to coordinate with like-minded programs. Which reminds me of one of the comments that Greg Gare made during the feedback session about the CSBG, the Community Services Block Grant, and to what extent that can be leveraged with either the water grant or with LIHWAP. So I just want to try to clarify that a little bit. In the federal LIHWAP law, there's no like overarching prohibition to, not being able to give the household CSBG and LIHWAP, right? So what the caveat is regarding administrative costs. So grantees can use other sources of federal funding to help pay LIHWAP administrative costs, so long as it's an allowable purpose under those other programs. But the total of all those different federal sources used to help offset the LIHWAP admin costs cannot exceed 15% of your LIHWAP grant for that year. So if you use 10% of your LIHWAP money towards admin, let's use a different number. Let's say you use 5% of your LIHWAP dollars towards LIHWAP admin, and then maybe you use another 1 or 2% from CSBG. From LIHWAP's perspective, that's okay because you're still within your admin cost cap, your whatever that calculation works out to for your tribe. So we would anticipate what's different with the water grants is that, again, Part 96 of the block grant regulations don't apply, but all of Part 75 does. And what's new to you if you're a LIHWAP grantee is that section of Part 75 that they call the cost principles. And I believe under the cost principles, there are all kinds of definitions regarding admin costs and indirect costs, which Greg mentioned. And so all of those rules would apply to how you use your admin dollars for the water grants. Whereas for the LIHWAP grants, it's Part 96 that applies. And what Part 96 says is that whatever administrative rules your tribe has that governs tribal funded programs must be followed with your federal LIHWAP. So we actually don't define what our admin costs for LIHWAP. What we say is whatever your tribal wide rules are for where admin costs with tribal funded programs, that's the definition you must use for your tribal LIHWAP. So those are two very big distinctions between how you sort through what's a qualifying admin cost under the water program versus the LIHWAP. I would like to pause and pass it to Seth. I think there were some questions he might want to jump in on and maybe clarify anything about CSBG.
Oh, actually, we have one person who has raised their hand, Karen Renz. So I'm just going to jump in. Karen, I have unmuted you and give your mic a test.
Test.
Okay, we can hear you.
Okay. I don't really have a question. I just would like to make a comment. There seems to be a lot of stipulations that are put on the utilization of this funding. And my concern is, paying for the rears and everything. We're not, I know that it's kind of a concern, but let's just say we're not seeing a huge pattern in that. And then in order for people to utilize this funding, they'd have to be in the rears. So to me, that would be a difficult way of advertising this program that it sounds really wonderful, is to, I'm sorry, you can't use this program unless you're in the rears. And to me, that's like encouraging what I would call bad behavior, for them to even just to utilize this funding. And so I just have some concerns about, all the stipulations that are being put on it and stuff. And that's just my comment. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So I will say, don't think any other folks have raised their hands. So I will give it back to Lauren, or perhaps Seth, because that's where we had left off.
This is Seth. I'll take a moment just to add a few things about the this issue of, for example, community services block grant. The terms and conditions strongly encourage and actually ask grantees to coordinate efforts with other utility assistance efforts, including whether they're funded by CSBG or other sources. There's also emergency rental program currently operating through Department of Treasury. So the bottom line here is this is adding to the pot of additional resources to help address needs. The funds, in terms of, we are trying to work to make sure that we're consistent with the statutory instructions, which talk about arrearages, but also reducing rate reductions. But it's basically specifically the statute gave us some particular uses for which the funds could be made. I'll just address one additional question. We had a number of questions related to the 424M and how to fill out certain sections of this. The thing that I would highlight is we have put on the website some instructions that outline how to fill out particular sections of the 424M. There's some unique issues where we are working through with regard to the CFDA, but we're currently the CFDA number. There is a instructions provided there, and just be aware that if anything changes in relation to our Code of Federal Domestic Assistance, whatever, you just follow those instructions, and it won't affect your anything around your award. If we have any other news about the CFDA, we would provide that. There were also questions about what federal how to list the federal agency, the name of federal agency. And so that would be the Office of Community Services. And then in terms of the funding, the start and end dates, the way this is working, there's instructions there. They are actually being updated. So the start date for the project would be listed as October 1st, 2021, beginning of this fiscal year, in terms of what you enter. The end date would be September 30th, 2023. And so we are updating that instruction on the website, but those are sort of, I think someone had asked about what that would be provided. In terms of estimated funding, just leave it blank at this point. We don't have, because we will be, that will be based on when we announce the allocations, which haven't been posted yet. So I think those are just a kind of a first shot at a couple of those questions. And just to highlight, you can go to the LIHWAP webpage, and there's the Dear Colleague message that both ask for the sign off on the terms and conditions and the 424M, and in there should be an instruction sheet that you can find on the website that will kind of walk you through the different fields and how to complete them. I think that is, so in terms of other comments, I don't have other questions to address personally yet at this point, and I think we are near the end of our time. I don't know, Edie, if you want to field any other questions or what comes next.
I think we should turn it back over to Janelle for some closing remarks. And just as a reminder to everyone, we will be reading through all of your questions and comments. And thank you so much for participating in this.
Thank you so much, Edie, and thanks to everyone who has participated on this call. I just want to reiterate that OCS is particularly excited about our role and involvement in this new water program. We recognize some of the challenges, as I said at the beginning of the session, that exist out there, particularly in regards to water and wastewater resources. And we know that the pandemic has probably intensified that. So I just want to remind everyone, please do make sure that you provide your feedback via the survey. And even if it is a question that you noted here in the Q&A or that you brought up during the, we recommend that you add that information to the survey as well, just to ensure that we capture it. And there were questions about the resources. We will be posting the slides, the recording and transcript to our website. We just need a little bit of time to get that together. But again, on behalf of Dr. Howard, I want to thank you for joining us. And we look forward to working with you in cooperation to make sure that these water programs are implemented efficiently and effectively, and they truly are helping the households that are in need. So thank you again.